Hello everybody! So for the longest time I've been receiving requests on how to do digital art, and I did do a tutorial quite a while ago, but I think it's time that I made another one because I feel like I know a bit more now and I could give advice that's a bit more helpful. And I wanted to start from the very basics because I know some people are completely new to digital art and I want to make it so that people feel comfortable enough to actually use the program to begin with. So Paint or SAI isn't too tricky, and that's why I like it. The interface is relatively simple once you've got your head around it. So we're going to be basically covering what all the different tools do in this episode, and we'll do the more interesting stuff like getting the portrait to look like it has a painterly style, or to do line work and colour it in future episodes or future versions of these tutorials. But today I'm just going from the very basic standpoint. So if you're a complete and utter beginner and you're really scared when it comes to digital art, then don't worry, because this video is here to help you and hopefully guide you and answer any questions you have. But if you still have any remaining questions, please feel free to ask them down below and I will try to answer them. And I know the people that watch my videos are super helpful anyway, so I'm sure someone will be able to help you out. So this is episode 1, understanding Paint or SAI and the tools. And yes, I did draw a potato above it because these are the things you can do when you know how to do digital art. So I'm going to get straight into it by making a new canvas. But before I do that, to get rid of what I have here, obviously I'm just going to click the little cross here. So I do not want to save this. So we're going to begin by clicking File, New, and then it will come up with this little menu saying create a new canvas. And there are some things you need to know before creating this canvas. So ideally you want your pixel size to be quite high. That's because you'll get a better resolution of the image, so it will be a better image quality. For example, if it was a lower resolution, then your finished drawing might turn out quite blurry, and obviously you don't want that. You want to be working as big as possible, but you have to make sure your computer will be able to handle it. So if you're working on quite an old computer or one that doesn't have much processing power, I wouldn't suggest doing a size that's massive. But I know my computer can handle this size, so I usually stick around the 3000, 4000 area. And because the width is smaller than the height, we're gonna end up with a portrait size canvas instead of a landscape one. You could also make a square if that's your preference or whatever, but I'll probably just make a portrait because that's just the canvas I prefer to work on. And resolution I generally tend to keep at 300. So you'll just click OK. Oh, and make sure it says pixel and pixel inch if you're going by what I've done. Or if you want to make your own kind of adjustments to the canvas, then go ahead. So this is the canvas that I end up with. And it's rectangular, like I said. But say, for example, if you don't like the shape of your canvas, you can change it at any time. Or if I've drawn something and, I don't know, I'm doing a shoulder and the arm's coming out there and I ran out of room to do the rest of the arm, then I'm going to want to extend the canvas, and you can do that anytime. So what you do is you click canvas at the top, then you click change size, and then you can add pixels to the side. So if I clicked add 400, that would add 400 pixels there, basically. Well, it would add a width of 400 up here, and then that will extend the canvas further. And if you wanted to delete part of the canvas, if you want to make it smaller, then you do the same thing, but instead of putting plus before, you just put minus. You don't need to worry about anything else right now up in the menu bar. But what we will go through now is this little area here. All these tools, I'm going to go through what each one does, its functionality, etc. So the first thing, which is like a little dotted square, is basically your selection tool. So for example, if I drew a little circle and I wanted to select it, I can select it like that. And if you want to deselect, you can just hit on any point outside of this selection. And if you click inside the selection and drag, you can move what you've selected. So you can also make a selection using the lasso tool Instead of making a square, you'll draw it freehand, and you can make any shape you want with that. And once again, if you click inside the selection, you can move this around. Next, we're going to go into the Magic Wand tool. So if I click around the circle, it will select the area around the circle. And if I clicked inside the circle, it will select the circle. One thing I will say is if you have something drawn and then you select it and you want to delete it, you don't hit the delete button on your keyboard, because that will just rotate the canvas like so. What you do want to hit is the eraser in this little bit of brushes, and you can rub it out. And it will only rub things out inside that selection. It won't affect anything outside that selection. Also, another really cool thing to note when you've made a selection is that you can click selection invert, and it will invert your selection. So whereas I had this area selected before, now it's the area outside that area that's been selected. And if I click selection invert again, I can now only draw within this square. This is the next tool, and this will just move anything around that you've drawn. And this is the zoom. So I currently have it set to zoom out. So if I just tap, I will zoom out. But if I make a selection, I can zoom into that area. So if I selected this circle, I can zoom into the circle. So that is how that works. This rotates the canvas, so if you're working on something at an angle or you need to rotate it to get a better view, you can do so. And right at the top here, you can select preset rotations. So if you want to reset it to normal, you just click 0. And then the next button is this hand tool, which is basically the move tool or the pan tool, how to move around. If you're at the bottom of the canvas and you want to move up, you can just use this little hand. And finally, if I selected another colour and started drawing with that, and I was like, hey, I really like that grey, I want to get it again, but I don't know how to select it on this colour wheel here, I'm not quite sure how to get that same colour, you can just click on the colour picker here and get that exact same colour again, and then you can draw back in that colour. This little bit here is the colour you have selected. This is your primary colour, that's your secondary colour. Your primary colour is basically determined on where you've put the colour on the colour wheel. So you can move this around to get any colour, and then this is the saturation from left to right. Left being less saturated, right being more saturated, and as you move down it's going from light to dark, obviously. And if I wanted a desaturated red, I could just do that. And my secondary colour right now is this kind of like orangey colour. If I wanted to start drawing in that secondary colour, I would just click this little exchange button, and then I can start drawing in that colour again. This is really useful if, for example, you are using two colours a lot or one other colour a lot. You can just switch it between them, so you always have that secondary colour saved there. For example, if you use a certain shade of red a lot or something, you could put that as your secondary colour. Now I'm going to go into this area here. So this might look a little bit confusing. What you do need to pay attention to is these little icons up here around the top. So if I deselect all of them, you'll see I only have my brushes now appear. So this is the colour wheel, this first one. I'll tap that again to hide it. So all you have to do is click it and select it to have it appear, and then click it again if you want it to disappear. But you will need that there so you can choose your colours. You could also use this to pick your colours, but I find it kind of difficult to work. Like I have no idea what's going on, so I wouldn't suggest doing that. The colour wheel is a lot simpler. This is another way you can select colours. So if you use this one, you can choose the colour. This is the saturation, and this is the darkness of the colour. But once again, I just prefer to use the colour wheel. It's a lot simpler. Then I don't really understand this one at all. This is just lightness and darkness, it looks like. Yeah, I'm not really sure. Oh, hang on. So if I made a green and filled that, and I made a blue and filled that, you could select the colours like that, basically. But I can't really be bothered with that. If you're working with a certain colour palette for a piece, you might want to save the colours that you're frequently using in this bit. So this is the swatches, it's called swatches. And if you want that to, it's really helpful. So if I wanted to set a colour, I'd pick the colour on the colour wheel, right click on a square and click set. Then if I want a slightly lighter one, I will right click and put set. And another lighter one, right click and set. And this is also really helpful if you have a select number of colours that you use a lot, like certain skin tones you might use quite frequently, or one of your characters like colour palette or something like that. You can save it in that section. Once again, clicking it to make it disappear. Finally, this one you can also use for colour palettes and stuff. So if this is a certain colour you use a lot, the advantage of doing this one is that you can actually, you're not restricted to the little squares. So you could write on this, so you could say this is like, you could write hair, so you remember what the colours are for. So if I see this cluster of colours and I don't remember what colours I set them for, I could just have a description underneath it. So it makes things a bit easier. I personally prefer to use the swatches palette though, because I generally tend to know why I've saved the colour. But it's personal preference really, and you might not want to put any swatches at all. You might just want to colour pick a certain colour if you've used it a lot, like I showed you how to do earlier. But I'm going to put the swatches palette back in place. I think I'm going to use a nice pink now, and I'm going to go through the brushes. Now, if you have Paint to SAI and you've just downloaded it, don't expect to have all the same brushes that I have. It depends on what version you have for a start. And secondly, I've I've made my own brushes for it. So that is why some of the brush names might be different or stuff like that. But there are certain brushes that you should also have. So I'm going to go through some of the brushes that I know you will have on your Paint to SAI, so you can just understand. So I'm going to demonstrate all the different brushes. So this is Sketch. Oh, it's a bit thick at the moment. So that's the Sketch brush. One thing I will mention is that I am using a graphics tablet, so I can get pressure sensitivity. So when I press hard, I get thick lines, and when I press softly, I get smaller lines. And that's because I am using a graphics tablet. I'm using a Wacom Intuos 4, and that allows me to do that where I am able to change the thickness. If you're using a mouse, you won't be able to do that. Also, another disadvantage to using a mouse is that it's more difficult than using a graphics tablet, and also your wrist might ache after a while. So I do really recommend getting hold of a graphics tablet if you can. So this is the pen tool. I think it has a slight delay because it seems to be a bit easier to use. So whereas the Sketch is quite fast to use, the pen's a bit slower, so it will help you get more concise lines. Then colour, I'm going to make this a bit bigger so you can see. Colour, it's kind of blurry a little bit, but obviously I assume you would use that to colour, but I don't really tend to use the brush at all. I mean, I know they're named certain things, but you can use them for anything really if you want. And the final one is Pixel. If I make this a bit, I'll zoom in a bit, try and show you. But the Pixel brush, I don't actually know what this does. Oh, am I not using the right thing? Yeah, I don't really know what the Pixel brush does, other than it has really sharp edges, but I can't really give you much guidance when it comes to that. So, sorry, I'm not really sure about the Pixel brush, but it seems to be quite sharp. Does it have? Yeah, anyway. you might want... Oh, and the minimum size, this applies to any brush, minimum size is the smallest the brush can be. If you put minimum size at 100, then you can't change the line weight at all. So that's something to bear in mind if you're not getting any line weight. Another thing is opacity of the brush you're using. If you use a lower opacity, it will be less less opaque, basically. So the colour won't be as bright and easy to see. Then obviously eraser is to rub things out. Then bucket is to fill things in. And now that's going to look really weird. Select, the little select tool is how you can basically select with just a brush. So if there's a specific area you want to select, say I wanted to make that specific area like a lighter colour without affecting any other bits, I could do it like that. So the select brush is a way to select much more concisely, and then you have a deselect. So if I select an area and then click deselect, I can then go and deselect chunks out of it. So now I only have this area selected and I could colour in that area, like so. Next up is the blur tool. This will just create a really blurry looking, kind of like misty look, similar to airbrush. Then you have, let me make this a bit bigger, airbrush, which gives a similar kind of look. And you can change the density of this, which will basically change how intense it comes out. Then there's marker, which you should have. I think you have that with it. I think that one comes with Paint or SAI. So when you press lighter, it gives like softer areas. So yeah, that's the marker. But I don't ever really tend to use that one. And the water one is basically like a watercolour, and this one's quite good for blending. So if I wanted to blend things in together, you'd have to turn the density down and the blending up a bit, I think. Yeah, there we go. That's how you blend with the watercolour. And I believe that's it for the brushes that will come with yours. I'm going to show you some ones I made. I don't know why I called this one Magic, but it has like a texture to it. These are textures that I downloaded off the internet. You can just search Paint Tools site textures. I might do a video on how to install and use textures in the future, but the textures that I'm using for anyone that's interested is Grudgy and Jizzy. That's what they're called. So this is my brush called Magic. I also have Copic brushes that are meant to imitate the look of Copics, kind of, but I don't really tend to use those. And that's basically it. And you can rename a brush by right clicking it and clicking oh no, you can't. Oh wait, no, you can, options, and you can change the name, and you can change the description, whether or not it has a individual stabilizer, which is something I also need to go through. Stabilizer is basically, let me just delete all this. Stabilizer will help you if you're trying to do a drawing that has line art specifically. So I'm on stabilizer 15 at the moment. However, if I go into S1, this will add a bit of lag when I draw, and that basically means that the mouse is a little bit further ahead than the line, and it allows it to be a bit slower, so it's easier for you to draw over a guideline or something and get a smooth line without it coming out really wobbly or something. So I'll show you without a stabilizer. It might come out like that, but with a stabilizer I'm going to use S7, which is the highest one. I can get a line like that without any kind of wobbles or anything. But I do recommend using something like S5. I wouldn't recommend going all the way up to S7 unless you really need that, I don't know, like a strong guideline. That's not the right word at all, but you know what I mean. There are also more advanced settings to the brushes, which you can bring up here, and at the bottom you do have the sizes of the brush you can get preset already, so just for ease of use. I'm going to take it off as stabilizer now. I generally tend to use 15 because I don't really do line art in my drawings. I do like painterly stuff, so it doesn't really come into account. But now I'm going to go through the layer functions and how layers work and stuff like that. So this will be the final part of this tutorial. Like I said, we are just starting with the basics. There's no how to draw or anything. This is a bit of an in-depth description of the basic tools of Paint Tool SAI. And so you're able to understand the interface a bit better, what all the different things do, so you can play around with it a bit more, and also so that you'll have a basic understanding when I go to actually explain more complicated stuff later on. But you do need to know the basics before you do anything else. So now I want you to focus your attention on this area. So this specific bit here, you'll see a very, very minute version of the canvas, and you see like a red selection, and the red line in the middle is the center of your viewpoint. So this whole red area here is basically a representation of what you're seeing here, like your field of view in this little area here. Moving this around will also move around the canvas. So that's an easier way to maybe pan instead of using the hand here. And if you want to get it centered, that's how you get it centered. Then this is the zoom. You can change the zoom here as well. You can also change the angle here. But I prefer to use this to change the angle. Next, this is the layer that you have. You can change the names of layers by double clicking on them. So if I put this as 1 for the first layer, or you can rename them things like eyes or mouth or something if you're doing different aspects of a face on separate layers. Hitting this button here with the piece of paper that has kind of like a folded edge will create a new layer, and this layer is above this layer. So if I drew something onto this layer and then selected the layer above and drew something onto there, because they're on separate layers, if I rubbed out something on this layer, it doesn't affect the layer below. Only anything I've drawn onto this layer. So if you want to do a sketch, first of all, you might have just one layer for that, draw out your basic guidelines, and then you might want to change the opacity, which is here. You can turn that opacity down. That'll change the opacity of the whole layer, anything on that layer. Then you can click new layer and then draw over your guidelines to get a more exact sketch. So it's definitely worth using multiple layers, even though most of the stuff that I do happens on one layer because it's a digital painting and everything's quite painterly. I still do make use of layer functions sometimes. So if I were to draw a little face here, and I'm going to keep this as simple as possible just so I can get it done really quickly. So the face is smiling, but it has no shading or anything like that. So a really quick and easy way to add shading in digital art, and this is one of the many advantages of doing digital art, is that you can basically just, well, I say cheat, it's not cheating, it's just a really, really easy way of shading. So if I click preserve, no, that's not the right thing. If I click clipping group, anything I draw on this layer will be above the layer below. I've also hit multiply, so it will shade anything on the layer below. If I clicked screen, it would lighten. If I clicked overlay, it would also lighten, but in a different way. Luminosity would make it really bright. Shade will shade it again, but a little bit darker and more saturated. Then multiply Lumion shade is a mix of luminosity and shade. And then finally, binary color is just black. So I'm gonna use shade, and I'm gonna select a color. I'm gonna change it slightly. I'm gonna select this color here, but I'm gonna change it ever so slightly so it's a bit more purple. Then I'm gonna draw over, actually I've decided I'm not gonna use shade, I'm gonna use multiply. I'm gonna draw over this character. Now because that looks a bit weird right now and intense, I'm gonna change the opacity down so it's more like that. Now if I want to blur out the edges of this, I can just use the blur tool to do so. And then you can hit Control E to merge that down with the first layer. Now I'm going to make another new layer, but this time hit luminosity and colour pick the original colour that we used. I'm going to use the blur tool to just add a little shine up here and a little bit down here. And this just shows you how you can use the layer functions to shade and highlight really easily. But you don't want to rely on these too much, because right now this looks really, it has no texture or anything to it, so it looks kind of plasticky, I guess that's the word you'd use. But I'm just going to add little feet. It has feet like a bird, and little arms, and then you can say yay. So that is how layer functions work. Right guys, so this is really rough. I haven't really coloured this very neatly at all. This is just for the sake of demonstrating. So I used a layer underneath that Lineart layer to colour everything in. But if you don't want the Lineart to all be one colour, for example, that's quite easy to change. I wish I'd have known about this when I started out, but I didn't. So I'm going to tell you guys now because I think this is a really important piece of information to know. Also, one other little quick thing is that you can press this little switch button to invert your drawing and see what it looks like when it's flipped. This will help you with proportion or anything like that. If you're not seeing any mistakes, flipping it will allow you to see some mistakes a little bit better. So for example, I don't really like the ear placement. Her cheek comes out a bit too far, and I think her nose could do with moving up a little bit. But I'm not going to be bothered to change the cheek or the ear right now. This is just for the sake of demonstrating. So what we're going to do is make a new layer above the Lineart layer, but you're going to click clipping group. So basically what happens is whenever I draw anything in this layer, it will only draw in the same area that has been drawn in the layer below it when you select this particular option. So that's what the clipping group does. So if I want to do coloured line art, which means like darker versions of the colours that I've already used, so I will use purple in this area around the hair. I colour pick the skin tone, but choose a darker version of it. Then a dark grey for the eyes, and then a darker version of this for the lips, and that again for the corners. So there we go. I've basically done some really quick, very rough colour line art, but just to show you guys. And if you want to change the colour of something, but you don't want to draw outside the area you've already drawn in on this layer, you can click preserve opacity, and then whenever you draw anything, it will only ever draw in this area that you've drawn in. And to turn that back off again, you uncheck the preserve opacity. And once again, to merge layers together, it's Control E. So you select the layer that you want to merge down, and then click Control E to merge it. And then everything is all one layer. So I've made this all one layer. I'm going to finish this tutorial off. I really hope this was in-depth enough for you. And as I said, leave any comments or queries that you have in the comments.